all the way back in 2005, I had said, you don't need all these terms. I mean, quit memorizing all the fucking terms we keep making up. You only need like 4 or 5 terms. I think I said 7 at most. How do you pronounce the name of your YouTube channel or group?
The Polish one, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's Dobre Rzuty.
Dobre Rzuty.
Yeah. Pretty well. Pretty nice. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can get the R in there just quite right, but
yeah. Yes, yeah. GNS.
Well.
Finally.
Well, I'm all for it, and I am focusing on that and that only
yes.
Tonight. So no tangents. But I will suggest that the term, hey, GNS, is moronic and annoying.
Okay.
That it is a short-lived transition in the development of ideas. It just happened to be the time when light was being shown on that dialogue.
Right.
And that's the form in which it escaped, at least the term in which it escaped off to the wild.
Yeah, although like even in Poland, a lot of people know about GNS and they know about the big model, and like usually when they refer to GNS, they actually mean the big model. But GNS just rolls off the tongue easier.
It does. It really did. Yeah.
So that's kind of like the reason why people use GNS, even though they understand it's not a very good term for this.
I understand that. History is history. But let's carry on with actual history, which predates my participation in these dialogues. If we go back to the mid-90s, maybe 1998, if we at the latest perhaps, there was a Usenet discussion, which raised the idea that goals of play were a significant piece of interactions at the role-playing table, which stated that way doesn't sound like a very shocking idea, but since nobody had ever said that before in role-playing ever for any reason, it was quite a shock. So when this was discussed, and a friend of mine pointed me to the discussions, I didn't really participate. I wasn't interested in Usenet, but I was interested in what they said. I think those discussions went off on a wrong track. First of all, there was those discussions that produced the words gamism, dramatism, and simulationism. So if anybody hates the fact that they're called isms or anything like that, blame them. Okay. So that's what they came up with those terms. Now, as goals of play, these were very interesting concepts. Very quickly, very, very quickly, they degenerated in the discussion to a discussion of techniques. So that you should look at a table and you say, oh, look at all the dramatists. You look at a table, oh, they're rolling dice and very intense. Oh, they're gamists. You know, this notion of a family of techniques or a presentation rather than a goal. Okay. And so it went very swiftly into that kind of discussion. And unsurprisingly, anybody who liked the use of instrumentation at the table but didn't feel competitive basically said, well, I guess I'm a simulationist because I'm not one of these talky people who just tell stories the whole time. So I must be a simulationist. That must be. And so anyway, all this got going in that conversation. So I came along and I said, hey, goals of play, that sounds really interesting. This is something we should talk about. We shouldn't talk about any kind of player design until we kind of get an idea of what sort of things humans want out of this. And it seemed very straightforward to me that, yes, they would factor into or perhaps be the end toward which systems of play could be pointed. Or that people were already doing that at the tables. They were already pointing their systems through modification at the goals they had. So this isn't really shocking to me. I was really interested, and I thought it was an easy point. So I put it together. Now, this was my first essay about this in 1998. I put together the idea with some methods talk that had been published in the game Everway and had been discussed in the social circles that included Robin Laws, Jonathan Tweed, James Wallace, and a variety, John Tynes, and a variety of other people who were all pretty much collegiate buddies. And this was right around the time too that that Magic was hitting it big, and Wizards of the Coast was putting out games that were sort of labors of love and stuff like that. So anyway, this was published in the game. This set of ideas was published in the game Everway, where they were talking about techniques at the table, and they talked about talking as a technique resolution. They talked about addressing some kind of randomized factor as a technique. They talked about just saying, okay, what is the situation in the fiction that has to happen? It's a constraint, on the situation. Boulder fell on your head, you're dead, whatever, or you're strong enough to pick it up, or you're not. And they said, okay, so that's something too. So they called those drama, fortune, and karma. So you can see this is very different. We have discussion of goals, and then we have this other thing about discussion of like instrumentation and the way we get a thing done at the table. And I said, oh, cool. Let's not line them up, but let's see how these relate to that. Anything to do with the instrumentation and the ways we do things in play with anything to do with goals. That was my first essay, System Does Matter, saying let's do that. Now here's an issue, is that here we have them using the word drama as a resolution technique. Then we have these other people who are saying dramatism as a goal. So I, being a good, systematic scientific thinker, said, well, we have to make sure that our names aren't screwed up. We can't make up new names out of nowhere because that, disrespects the people who started this. So you keep the names as you can, but if something's really screwing something up, change it, and you have to change the new one and keep the old one.
Fair enough, right?
That's the rule in the sciences. If you got these two names that are overlapping and screwing things up, you got to change the new one, keep the old one. So I said, all right, keep drama as a technique, but we can't have dramatism. And I cast my brain around a little bit and said, well, I guess we need a new name for it. And narrativism seems like an at least as ugly term, right? At least as offensive linguistically as a term as dramatism. So we'll toss that in, but I'll leave the construction that these people had come up with. So I said, all right, from now on, we're going to start thinking about what we do at the table. And I realized that the threefold discussion, which was that goals discussion, they called it the threefold at that point, was going off the rails because people were really talking about, well, I'm 30% a gamist and I'm, 20% a narrativist and, blah, 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 this kind of thing. Just because I roll dice 30% of the time, I must be, a gamist, or
right.
Whatever. So things were getting really bollocksed up there, in my opinion. So I published my own essay about this, but gave credit to all these people for the cool ideas that they were bringing in. And for whatever reason, this is what drew a lot of attention. Probably because RPGNet got going, Gaming Outpost got going, and the Forge was soon to come. And the sort of visibility of publishing Sorcerer the way I did was very high. So I put the essays in the back of the book of Sorcerer. So anyway, so this was sort of the intellectual founding. And as time went by, I quickly found that it was hell trying to keep people from saying, oh yeah, narrativism, and suddenly coming up with all the ways and means of play that they thought that must mean. And completely losing sight of the idea of as a goal that you may or may not achieve, and thinking it instead as a family of what to do at the table. And especially because I was talking in terms of game design, it was brutal trying to keep people from running off on that. People ran around all over the internet bleating what they thought I was saying, or what they thought I was saying, and madness ensued. I mean, I was just like, you people, you got to stop. But, I don't control anybody. So anyway, I tried to keep the discussion, on track, but it was very difficult. And I published those essays that you've probably seen, right? The 2002, the 2003 essays. And at that point is why I changed the names of the goals, because I realized that the threefold, I realized I'd stepped away from the threefold, right? I
Right.
can now say, instead of incorporating what they said, I was inspired by what they said. And now what I was saying was a lot different from what that community had kind of gone off to say. So that's where Step On Up and The Right to Dream and Story Now came from.
Right. So,
Um,
so at this point, have
mhm.
you added something to the threefold model, or were you just like kind of
Yes.
trying to go
While
back
I
to
was
the
trying to put
roots?
these together, mhm. No, I was not trying to get back to the roots. I realized
Right.
that I was actually thinking about something that in their discussions they had only kind of brushed on early on,
I see.
and that I had my own notions that came out of my long history of play and interactions with people, and that I just needed to focus on that. So that's when I said, look, thank you to the threefold, but now I'm writing something that I can put my name on, which I'm saying is authored by me. And the other important point about this was that I wrote those essays not as my magnum opus, like I told you before. I didn't write them as this holy text that concluded everything and said what the way I think it is. No, this was an ongoing discussion with a lot of fierce ideas going on. And I said we needed at least a reference that we can look at so that people quit saying things like Ron says dot 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 and quit saying things that have no bearing whatsoever on any of these topics that have been raised. So that's how those were written, was simply to say, all right, I'm getting my mind together about this. I'm pushing myself as far as I can at the moment, but I know that this is a work in progress. So
Okay.
during the writing of those is when I came up with the notion that really any goal is embedded in is an expression of a medium. And I didn't use the word medium at the time, but this is when I was using brackets, right? I was saying, okay, so these are inside those, and I was realizing that the what I was now calling creative agendas were not able. I couldn't put them in a bracket,
Okay.
right? So I said the brackets are
Mm.
about something else, the characters and the setting and the locations and the what's imagined and the techniques we use to kind of make things go, right? This guy hits that guy, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And any changes that are made to the characters and the imagined situation. That's all the imagined stuff. People have struggled for a long time. And since I was focusing, I really wanted to focus on the imagined stuff as a phenomenon at the table and not as a product that you could transcribe into a movie script or a novel. I wasn't interested in the imagined stuff as a product. I was interested in it as an experience as it was being made. And that's when I used the word shared imagined space, which I think is an excellent term. Instantly perverted into shared imaginary space, which is a completely different concept. But imagined is an active thing. You are imagining it as an active phenomenon. And shared is also tricky. It doesn't mean simultaneous, it just means overlapping to a pragmatic point among the people.
Right.
So think about that. You're creating what is effectively an imagined space, but it is the extent to which it is shared. That's what we're working with, right, as we speak and listen. So, so that's what I meant. I said, okay, so that's the medium, and then the goal is what you want to do with it. This led to all sorts of ways. I'm a visual thinker, diagrammatic thinker in many ways, and so I often said, well, if you've got these layers with the biggest one, this one I call it the big model, right? Because we have this big social scene,
Hmm.
people and their interactions as people, and you have what they're imagining inside it. Inside that, you have the techniques that they're used to making it change. Then, if you want to, you can look at the little itsy bitsy, teeny tiny techniques that kind of appear and disappear all the time, which I called ephemera. So this is kind of a nice. I like the picture myself. It's a big globe, right? Going in, but it's not
Hmm.
a model of all play. It's a model of this instance of play with these people. So when people say the big model and they come and they want to see all the different kinds of role playing, all sort of situated in a little diagram or something like that, that's not what they're going to find. They're going to find actually more of a extremely local a vocabulary for discussing any local instance of play, of people actually doing it. So you can see now where if somebody kind of comes up and hears, oh, Ron Edwards has a model of role playing, they're instantly, you can see the tendency for somebody to say, oh, so all the different kinds of role playing are supposed to be like in this somehow, right? As a one big, huge visual, sculpture. And there's no such thing.
Yeah, so one could actually argue that you didn't create a model, you created a list of vocabulary for talking about role-playing games.
My argument was that since you could take this particular construct and then turn it to whatever goal the people were turning it to, and that we could actually talk about the specific relationship of techniques to changes to the imagined material wherever we were. It was the sense that these were a set of generalized points that could be applied in many different cases, which in biology is what a model is.
Fair enough.
Because we only think about ecologies and critters and real stuff hopping around and having babies and things. We don't really think in terms of pseudo animals and weird, you know what I mean? I mean, we are talking about phenomena at all times. So therefore it's difficult for me to, when people are coming in with more of a mathematical or an engineering kind of concept of modeling, right? I don't know what they're talking about. So I can kind of see how that would develop. Well, anyway, things kept going. For a while I was calling that medium exploration. I was trying to use what people were providing. I didn't want to make up everything. I wanted to take into account everything people said that wasn't blither. And one person was talking about, well, how about exploration as a priority? And then when I finally realized that what they were describing was what everybody wanted, imagined things happening. And that's when I started to think, wait a minute, so how come this simulationism thing that everybody keeps saying is their top priority has nothing in it that nobody wants?
Right.
And that's when I started to become very skeptical. Nobody realizes this because they only read those 3 essays when I was trying to give as much credence to the purported goals that had been listed as I could. And there were people who felt very, very strongly that won the integrity of the medium itself, effectively, right? The vividness of the imagined stuff, the sense of working with imagined events and things like that, and caring about what happens in it, things like that. They were unable. I mean, I think in many ways, talking about the real goals of play is counterintuitive for people. Nobody wants. I mean, they kept trying to turn it into phrases like intentions, which is inappropriate. They kept trying to turn it into phrases like, oh, well, all sorts of things. But it was very hard to say, look, people have goals when they do things together. They don't need to negotiate. They don't need to try to understand. Don't need to, formalize like in a contract or something. You don't have to explain to every single time you go and you play football down in the field with your friends what winning and losing is, and one side's going to lose. You get that, right? You don't have to explain that shit.
Right.
So anyway, but people had a really hard time addressing that level of human interaction as a topic. So anyway, I struggled with this for a while, and ultimately I said, okay, you know what? I can't take this simulationism seriously anymore. I put a lot of thought to it and said, and listened to everybody who was totally advocating for it. But most importantly, I played games with it. And I discovered a few things. I am now of the viewpoint that if you struggle with the medium, if the medium doesn't work for you, And what I mean by work for you is it's a social issue too. You're with other people. They're glad to be there, and you're glad to be there. You're all interested in the imagined material, what it is, and whatever it is you're there for, they are putting energy into as well. So they're enjoying themselves and you're enjoying themselves, but because each other is doing it. Right? Now, this is a baseline expectation, including the understanding of learning curves, the understanding of the fact that you can like people very much, but they don't want to do this thing this way with you. Or that there are other people that you kind of only, like enough, but they're really into doing this thing the way you do. Right? All these things are pieces of this, right? These concepts. So I suggested that this should not be looked at as an ideal of role-playing, the perfect game, the wonderful, impossible thing that only the best players will achieve once every 12 months on the full moon, right? They're going to have that moment when we all cared and we liked it, and we got the things happened, right? No, this to me is baseline, because it's the baseline for any other fun thing people do together. When I said, why do we have such low standards? I mean, I remember talking with people for ages about Sorcerer, and they said, "Oh, it's a great game, but you could only play with really good players." And I was thinking to myself, are you a practitioner or not? Find people who want to do it and play with them. No role-playing game is under the compulsion to accommodate the compromises you've made regarding the people you play with.
Right. It's it's kind of like saying, like, friendship is great, but you need good people for it. Like,
well,
yes,
we need good people for doing this thing, yes. But as I say, that's exactly the case for any other creative group activity or competitive group activity that we do.
Yeah, because you cannot define friendship in such a way that it won't require good people you like to participate in this friendship together with. So, okay.
Yeah, there was a set of interesting essays written quite a long time ago called The Geek Social Fallacies, which are extremely relevant here. And I was citing them constantly while talking about this. But the idea being that this is a medium that is people are capable of doing, should they so desire, and that the goals of play will emerge very quickly among a group once they get the medium going, and furthermore, that it's sort of a self-correcting process if somebody realizes that what they want out of this isn't forthcoming with these people. It's very much a clear, okay, find other people to play with for this. So what kind of goals am I talking about? To go all the way back then, what do I mean by story now? What do I mean by step on it? We're going to throw away the right to dream because it's just enjoying the medium and the medium can work. Okay. So no problem. I mean, yeah, we all want that. So the next question is, what are those other two things? And they are ordinary things that humans do. We talked about the Story Now one already, when you said, what can role-playing games uniquely provide? Or what is special about the medium? Why would we do this? And the answers has to do with the fact that we, as I talked about, folk story creation, non-commercialized leisure time story creation in groups in a fashion that actually works is kind of fun. Actually, we don't, and we like making those things. And the trouble is that the word story has been polluted so badly in role-playing culture that it's almost impossible to use at all. I have found multiple times that using it in these terms is absolutely painless among non-role players. Say, oh, wow, so it's like you don't have the novel and you go through the process by which an author would get one, but it's different. You're actually sort of, being the audience while you do it. That's pretty cool. Easy enough. But to a role player, story means imposed, breaks play, sits on play, takes over play, overrides play,
Right.
pollutes play.
So an interesting point about this, like Polish, different language, different words, same problem.
Right.
If you talk about story in Polish words, yeah, same thing.
And so I blame aspects of the hobby itself and its particular textual history, because this is we have no independent case studies. Everybody was hit by, for example, the early White Wolf games calling themselves storyteller and really imposing their notion of what story means for role playing, and that hit generationally too. It hit a whole bunch of mid-teens really hard. Right. And those, you see what I mean? I mean, it's going to play a big role in this, a disproportionate historical role in setting the bounds of language and identity in the hobby and stuff like that. So I'll leave all that to the anthropologists and the historians to debate over and get their doctorate degrees over that, in the future. But I want to focus on what has become of so-called GNS. And the answer is that the big model is still itself. We still have the overriding social context of play. We've still got the production of the medium through hearing one another, right? Listening to one another. We've still got we've still got the interaction of such things as authorities and stuff like that, which I wrote all the way back in 2004. It's not new. The mechanics of authorities and the whole intent, initiation, execution effect, all these different things, and the idea that we adopt constraints on the use of these things by choice. We adopt, to say that goblin is dead is the same at any role-playing table. The question is, what procedures, what constraints, and what cues are we accepting in order to say the goblin is dead? And so those then become their own topics. It will never be so simple as to say, use this set of techniques and you will get step on up or game is to play. It's never going to be that simple. And it can't be. How could it be? Because humans are humans. You give us a set of interacting procedures, and if we feel step on up about it, I assure you we'll do it. What's interesting to me then is what little pieces they start with that they end up abandoning, and which little pieces that they start with they end up inflating or adding to. Right? So that's cool. But system does matter, otherwise I wouldn't change it. But on the other hand, it's not as though they see this system and they all hang their heads and say, oh, gee, I guess we can't compete now. Fuck that. They're going to do it anyway. Right? So that's an important point. But when I realized that I played a game of D&D 3.0/3.5 in the mid 2000s, and it was played with at the time a kid who lived down the street and his dad, and for some reason everybody just thought it was amazing that I was playing D&D 3.0, and which it's not. And also everybody was like, well, how are you doing with this simulationist system? And I was kind of like, well, look at what we're doing. We've got this whole thing. I mean, we got the one guy's a half elf, the one guy's a half orc, and they said that they've got the same mom. Right? They've got the same human mom, which is cool. I didn't make that up. The players made that up. And I was like, holy shit, that's great. And so we went to her funeral was the opening part of play. And all sorts of things proceeded from there. Just crazy. Proceeded from there. And all sorts of zombie hyenas and much more to have fun with.
Right.
So, but it ended up, through very little effort on my part, except to run with what the players were kind of providing. we ended up with a pretty good, I'm not going to say it was, I didn't want the Pulitzer Prize for literature for it, but was it a reasonably good fantasy adventure about brothers and, elves and orcs and, all sorts of cool things? The answer is yeah. And it had like, climactic moment and all sorts of stuff without forcing it. So it was very difficult to get people to understand that we took the rules that we had. And what happened in the course of those many sessions that we played, I forgot to level up. I forgot to have them level up. They're well past the point when they had earned enough experience points to level up. We just all forgot.
But were they like level 1 or something higher?
No, 3.
All right. 3. Okay.
So yeah. So they were level 1 is not really.
It would be hard to believe they survived at level 1, but yeah,
exactly. Okay. Level 3 is a very for 3.0/3.5. Level 3 is a really nice, solid platform for play. And so that's I looked at it and said, okay, there you go. Old Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, it was 4th level. 6th was solid, but 4th was okay. We can play. And anyway, that's what we did. But do you see my point? You take a rule set and it, especially if, in my opinion, the rule set is a little bit blithering and a little bit overstuffed and a little bit, uncertain. I mean, it's really just trying to get the medium together and it's trying to please multiple perceived audiences and things like that. You sit down with that in 2 sessions and 25% of the rules have sort of been forgotten. And you will, and since we're all into playing the characters, I'm having a great time, magic missiles are flying everywhere and sorts of things. We end up with a tweaked version that if you looked at the system in question, you say, oh, well, if you have that kind of priority at the table, this will serve you very nicely. So when you present some systems, the question is whether you look at it and you say, wow, I come with a priority of this kind. This thing is really going to sing. I'm probably not going to have to kit bash this at all, which you usually do without even knowing it. Right? But we're probably not going to do that. We can use what it's got, and it's going to rock for our purposes. Whoever wrote this is kind of speaking our language in terms of, goals of play. So I was really interested in that kind of design. And I found it, okay, so good enough. That brings us to about 2007. Is that give you a pretty good idea, right, where I'm standing at that point?
Okay, and 2007 in terms of games that were on the market was what? D&D 4?
No, not yet. That came out a little bit later. And then well, in terms of, and Pathfinder wasn't out yet.
Okay, so it's like the late days of D&D 3.5.
Yeah.
Like everybody seems to be getting internet, at least in Poland. Like at this point, pretty much everyone starts to have internet. I don't know I guess in US, people had internet for some time.
Little while before that. Everybody, not so much, but it's still been less than 10 years.
Yeah, and I think like social media starts to get going.
Social media got going right about that point, but we hadn't quite realized at the time. Blogs, blog was the biggie, right?
Right.
Well, as it turns out, it was also just before that there had been the breakaway site Story Games. And I think I showed you this in the diagram that I gave you last time, right? The OSR and Story Games in relationship to the Forge. I will give you a little history if you care.
Sure.
Which is that the fellow who started Story Games, I think, did so in a lot of goodwill. There were toxic elements. Toxic element number 1 was that they wanted more of a sort of, well, we're all cool, so we can just post what we want. We don't need moderation. And so this is the place for the cool people to go and we'll hang, right? And that they said that literally. The cool kids of the Forge can go hang out like at RPGNet. That's a quote. And I, of course, despise the idea of cool kids under all circumstances. And so I was like very unhappy with that phraseology. And I also rightly recognized it as very patronizing to people who showed up and had great ideas, great hearts, great play or good questions, which was always my priority at the Forge. New people. That's who you should be talking to. Quit talking to each other. And so, as it turned out, story games had several infrastructural problems as software was concerned, that in features that I thought were extraordinarily badly conceived. Being able to have secret conversations in the middle of a public conversation, right? You could say who could and couldn't see your comments. Many other things that I thought were quite rotten. The Forge was roundly criticized for not letting people edit their comments, but I am deeply grateful that I never permitted people to edit their comments. And of course, people edited their comments when somebody said something they didn't like. They would go back and like make themselves look less stupid and stuff like that. That was also very common at G+, by the way. So, anyway, there are a lot of things about story games that quickly went wrong as far as I was concerned. Due to the operations of the site, both socially and as a platform, status became very important. And who was sort of this perceived hierarchy of insiders and higher status people, and a very deep focus. There was a number of people who had gotten involved at the Forge who were, for lack of a better word, snot-nosed punks, which is not in and of itself a bad thing. But the trouble is when you when they sort of become each other's own cheering squad. And this happens to a number of people who quickly started this is when games started being pumped into existence very fast. Started around 2005, which is I think when story games began. And it just became very, very rapid. So people were, and also print on demand and digital printing was just invented. So all of a sudden you could hit a button and your book would pop out at the end of at the end of the machine. Right. So, and again, I rather like the fact that exists, but it wasn't so good for the community at the time. What we got was a very strong idea of what a story game was emerged at story games. And that was very uncritically constructed and very imitative, and imitative in a way that tended to preserve bad design. And so you ended up with, and with a few people whose work was sort of considered the gold standard. And pretty soon, if you were going to make a story game, you needed to make it look like that.
Right. Do you have some examples of story games that were created in that manner, or would you rather not say, to not point fingers?
Well, all I can say is when I start reeling off titles that I do and don't like, anybody listening suddenly has a shit fit and can't pay attention to anything else I say.
Fair enough.
But I can say that I consider the number. Okay, first of all, let's back up a little. When Andy started story games, and he stopped running story games very quickly because he kind of realized, I think, what he had done and didn't really like the way it was going. It wasn't doing what he wanted as a nice place to be.
Right.
And his concept of the word story game was deliberately chosen because it meant nothing. We know these things produce kind of fiction at the table, right?
Right.
And so why not call it story game and kind of get away from the baggage of role-playing game and have a neutral name that means nothing, and that'll be good. I can actually applaud that on his part. That seemed like a reasonable thing. But through the dynamics that I was talking about, the term story game became a particular way to play. And I saw that happen very rapidly, over very fast. Work by John Harper, Jason Morningstar, and as time went by, Ben Lehman, Jonathan Walton, varies in quality because the talents of some of those people are considerable. But they're either those games themselves that were made at that time, and I definitely point to a game like the Shabalhiri Roach, which in its first form as a draft, I thought had amazing potential, and then in published form was actually a worse game. Or if you take something like Lady Blackbird, which takes interesting, high potential, possibly flawed, I'm not sure, game, The Shadow of Yesterday. But if it's flawed, it's far less flawed than most games out there and is full of things to think about and do. So very rich no matter what. Well, you take it, you throw away the setting, and you take and you basically put in a attractive steampunk single skit adventure that no matter what any character does, you'll just basically end up with a little, they're all pointed at each other in different ways, and you're going to end up who's on whose side at the end. But really, I mean, it's just a matter of interlocking pieces. You throw them together and see which pieces end up interlocking at the end. Lady Blackbird is basically not a role-playing game. It's a skit. It's a short theater piece that you can kind of say, oh, I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to make him stab that guy, right? And it's that kind of, I would say, kind of a friend of mine called them wind-up toys. They weren't role-playing games or anything that we were getting out of playing role-playing games that we liked. They were wind-up toys. You sat down, wound them up, and it would click through all the different ways that it might go, and you got to basically be there when it did that. And so this became sort of the standard. It was a fun little package. I actually really applaud the idea of the tiny role-playing game, physically speaking. Would love, and I know I'm not alone, and people have tried to do it multiple times. We all want a box, a cool box, like the little, the Euro Games little box, man. These things are beautiful. Pick it up, open it up, pull out the little booklet, talk around a little bit, teach people a bit, and we play a role-playing game. And we've got the little pieces we need, we got the little book we need. It's all there in the box, and it would be a real role-playing game, right? We would actually be able to come up with stuff, and it wouldn't be just a wind-up toy. It wouldn't be, right, a board game. It would be, and I like board games, don't get me wrong, but we don't have a problem with what they are, right? I mean, you don't have a difficulty explaining what a board game is to people. With role-playing, you kind of do. So anyway, we all want that. I want one. Eero Tuovinen in Finland actually did a really good job, probably the best one of those I've ever seen. It's called Zombie Cinema. And if you read it, it's just like Primetime Adventures. If you actually play it, the thing rocks. But God help you if you have story game in your head and then sit down and try to play it. So anyway, there were some nice things that came out of this, but I noted that some of the people kind of kept one foot at the forge. Eero is a good example, and so is Jason at that time. I was a playtester, if that's the right word. I would say somewhat of a participant in his design of the game that won him the Diana Jones Award, Great Ranks, for example. But there was definitely a sense that story games became its own community with its own status, its own way to be, and its own thing to make. Every time I visited there, I liked it less and less. I didn't like the way that new people, tended to have to conform to get along. I didn't like the way that the discussions would produce gibberish and nobody would call out gibberish. It was mean, right? So I was too wrong, right, to call out, say that's gibberish. So anyway, so I really think story games went way off the rails. And the term itself, today, if somebody produces a game called a story game, I will be interested. This may be something fun to play. My hit rate on that is what, 10% at best? Most of them are awful. In terms of procedure, in terms of And you end up with kind of this smooth blend collective notion of what a story game is, and people play that regardless of this book that they've opened. And a lot of it is just basically the same old railroading. We just do it all around the table toward each other. Right? I mean, it used to be one person grabbed control by becoming the GM and made everything happen the way they want. So what? We're going to democratize abusive behavior. Fantastic. Sign me up.
I see. Okay.
Right? So they don't actually have system. They have system that you can ignore while you take over what's going on. Just because you make something collective, if it's not a functional device, doesn't make it better. So again, though, there are some examples that are quite strikingly good. If you can take a game where you do have all sorts of, you set, okay, we're going to go around, we're going to make up the village. You make up the religion for the village, or you draw out of the bag. Okay, I got 3 red chips. That means I have to come up with 3 negative things for every positive thing, right? And I'll come up with this about the village. Okay, pass the bag to the next person. You could do any of these things, right? And you come up with a village. If playing what happens in the village is fun and has features that I like to talk about, agency, bounce, uncertainty, lack of consensus, consequence, fantastic. Who cares if we take turns opening the scene?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go ahead and do that. That has properties that may serve this game very, very well to do this. But that's the thing you assess. Neither centralizing scene framing, for lack of a better, just use the word, to centralize scene framing in one person is neither good nor bad as such.
Mm-hmm.
To collectivize it or to distribute it, in turn among us is neither good nor bad as such. However, it is good or bad relative to all the way the rest of the game works.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm interested in, is the intersection of different rules, not this rule is good or this rule is bad. Somebody says to me, hey, this is great. We should play this. There's no GM. And I'm like, what the fuck does that even mean this time? Right? I mean, what does that even mean? This very same tasks are going to have to occur at the table.
Yeah.
Are you saying they don't occur? Or are you saying that we take turns? What do you actually mean by that? So really drilling into that and finding that in many of the games published as story games, what you get is blither in answer to some of these questions. So, you don't really know. I roll a 7 through 9 in this PBTA game. It means, okay, I'm going to pick this option. Somebody's watching from the shadows. I get to, I hurt my opponent, but somebody's watching from the shadows. So who makes that up? Whose job is it? Who has the authority over that someone watching from the shadows and why? What they're going to do next? If you don't know, then it's not a fucking rule. Right? It's just not a rule that we can actually operate off of and utilize as part of play. We've just hit this huge wall of don't know how to proceed. And the only solution is for somebody to grab it. And it is and once you have that grabbing of content from one another, it's a very short step to just griefing each other with it, just giving each other trouble with it.
Right. But one could argue that a game like this becomes a complete game if you have a resolution, like a way of determining who has the authority in any given moment.
Absolutely.
Like if you add
That's exactly what it means.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it is that particular point and a number of other similar points that very consistently across the story games get dropped.
Right.
And I find that basically just irresponsible. I mean, if people are supposed to be having some background in independent role-playing design over the last 20 years, then the first thing they're going to learn is let's never be confused about who says what. Let's just not be confused about that. And even if it is a consensus discussion, we know the bounds of that consensus discussion.
Right.
And also the notion I keep talking about, which is constraint, which is to say what you use that you already know to put somebody in the shadows, that there is such a thing as an invalid option. We have no content in play. Let's say we have no content in play imaginable by which someone watching in the shadows actually brings any resonance or perspective to what we're doing. It's completely out of the blue. Somebody who could be anybody. Why? I guess we'll have to make it up. Yeah. Where even? Shadows.
Yeah.
Right. There's nothing right to put, but no, the person picks the option because they roll 7 to 9. That's one of the options. And then they look expectantly at the game master, who now has to jump through this hoop right then and there. That's not play. That's like playing Mad Libs. So in other words, you're not working with the known and working with the fiction as you see it, and then having the operations of the techniques impact it. So it's not actually got any coherence in any kind of sense of the medium itself. So there are plenty of games that are very wide open in what you get to say, but if they preserve that notion that you are operating according to the constraints of the device you're using, and you're working with the incoming fiction as you have experienced it already, then all of a sudden when you say someone's watching from the shadows and it's so-and-so, and everybody goes, oh shit, that makes perfect sense. Oh, that's terrible. Right? Or, oh my God, he's here. Thank God. Right? Stuff like that. I mean, there are ways to actually make that exact device of play very fun. But it's a relationship to the fiction as it stands, and it's a relationship to know. And also, what does this have anything to do with actually resolving the conflict? Have you forgotten to resolve the attack roll that you were making in the first place? I've played a number of PBTA games where that happens all the time. They get so excited about the little options they pick at 7 through 9, they forget to resolve whatever's going on. So at which point you suddenly have these huge kettles full of content and you don't even know where your characters are anymore. So this is what I'm driving at. That zone of game design fell apart, in my opinion, socially speaking. Doesn't mean that somebody can't make a great game out of some of those ideas, and as well they can. But basically, I mean, I'll say it very straightforwardly, deforging story games left a mess. So that's what happened with that. And let's not forget that we are talking about people who are very good at managing their image on the internet, far more so than me. And that it was very difficult, in fact, impossible, I just don't know how, to continue to, I didn't see it as a competition. I mean, the Forge was never anything but, a cardboard box on a street corner in the first place. And I said, well, that's who I am. That's what we do. But it was also at that point where I refused. I think I told you about this. I refused to make the Forge a brand. I wouldn't let people put a logo on their books. I also didn't let people make sort of a Forge Corp where they would then all have a collective by which the bookstores could order the games all at once. Things, and so Indie Press Revolution was formed to make something like that. Indie Press Revolution was taken over by a person who I think was dubious at best in terms of their ethics, and self-promoted so that their games suddenly became the hotness. And anyway, there's so a lot of practices got going that were very much about capitalizing on the indie thing, that the Forge had promoted, but in which case it basically destroyed what we were doing. And so once Story Games and Indie Press Revolution, which also was abandoned by its founder because he couldn't control what was going on with it, and was taken over by a member of his staff. Once those really hit their their stride around 2008, 2009, I was like, okay, forget it. The Forge is going to shrink again. Clearly, publishing your own role-playing game is now industry standard, or an industry standard. It's no longer weird or dumb or something like that. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
came here for, was to establish that. We're going to shrink the Forge, and as planned, close it fairly soon. So that's
Okay.
when I said, okay, the work here is done, and there's no point in struggling for mind share, market share, when obviously I don't want to do those things. If I had wanted to do those things, we would have elevated to become, I don't know what, the people who bought Gen Con in 2009 or some shit like that, which is what a number of people really wanted to do. They really wanted to leverage this whole thing into its own new hobby that would dominate the hobby. They used language like that. Now it's kind of like, fuck you guys. So, and I lost a lot of friends at that point. But do you see how anything I was saying about role playing
Mm-hmm.
as an idea was going to be completely lost in this whole social promotional mess? Right? There's very little. That's why I want to stay with what we're talking about, this whole GNS thing. Basically, what I mean is that people's exposure to this basically stopped around 2004. And nobody was interested after that, except for people. I said, okay, if you want to talk about this stuff, come to the Forge and we'll talk about it. There's a lot of great conversations that went on there, but they weren't very public at that point.
I see.
Yeah. So I started focusing more on consulting for people who were interested, and I started focusing especially on, at the time, I started focusing more on games, with Spione and with Shahida and with the books that I wanted to do after that, which I've never done. I was really focusing on more political work that had role-playing games in them. A very
Okay.
different kind of book. And I'm very proud of both of the ones I published, but I am very sad that I will never get around to the others. So does that help a little bit with sort of the history of the ideas in its way?
Yeah, I think so, because like these are the parts of history we don't really see, like parts of we mostly talk about the GNS and the big model as it is written on the Forge. And pretty much I think that's it. Like very few people know what you worked on later and what led to whatever happened on the RPG market in 2010 and later. So
Well, yes, clearly social media kicked in very, very hard, and in my opinion, Kickstarter was invented before 2012, but 2012 is when kind of the big flip occurred, and it became the new venue for role playing as a publishing phenomenon. And let's see, I concentrated on a couple of things. One was that I had become well known to the Italian community, and I was really enjoying visiting Italy and going to their conventions and working with their discovery and translation of my games, Vincent's games, a lot of other people's games. And the contact with the community there was generally very positive, and it was a thoughtful, an argumentative and thoughtful audience. They seemed kind of fresh to this stuff, and so I concentrated on those. And I also concentrated in 2013 in getting Sorcerer reprinted with a new physical format, and a variety of things like that. But the ideas kept going, though, because I found that working on the consulting and the discussions at the Forge in those last few years were really good. I had a forum after that got eaten by spam, which is too bad because for the few years that it got going, a lot of good things got done there too. So it was very personal, just my one little forum, one person, and it had an active community of several hundred people and was
okay.
Reasonably fun. But after that, I said around 2013, 2014, I said, okay, what am I doing here? I mean, do I really want to, I'm never going to be able to work on the American militancy and the Vietnam and the Cuban African games that I want to work on. the books I would like to work on. I'm going to, I've got a couple of other weird little ideas I always want to do, but do I really want to be an industry publisher anymore? What is that really serving? Every time, I find a new distributor or distribution mechanism, they go bankrupt or they're corrupt or something. Every time that, the Gen Con thing is getting old. What's the point of going to Gen Con anymore? The expense is enormous, absolutely enormous. It's just a money sink every year. What am I getting out of this? And so I was really thinking about what the point was of, why don't I just make everything a PDF and just put it on the internet, and anybody who wants it can just fucking have it, right? So, and so I gave some thought. This was a few years thought of how I wanted to do this. And I also was thinking, all right, how about presenting my ideas so that people can actually understand them? It's time to start thinking not in terms of what the ideas are. I'm feeling pretty confident about a lot of this. There's a lot of room to develop them, but the framework is in place for me now. How do I start actually teaching it? Right? How do I actually start? That's something I'd never concentrated on because we were still working on it. That's why the texts are all impenetrable and contradictory and all sorts of things because, definition shift and everything, because that's what the discourse was like. So I said, all right, how about a pedagogical version where I'm actually saying things in plain language? All the way back in 2005, I had said, you don't need all these terms. I mean, quit memorizing all the fucking terms we keep making up. You only need like 4 or 5 terms. I think I said 7 at most. And I still feel that way. I still think that, you really need very, very few specialized terms to talk about these things.
Which 7 terms?
Back in the Dark Ages, you could probably find at the Forge still something that was called, sadly, the Forge Glossary. And it sort of collected all the terms, right?
Yeah.
But in the beginning, I looked at this mess and I was like, this is not a glossary. This is an artifact of people grappling with ideas.
So some people in Poland are very insistent on using the Forge glossary. And if you use any of the terms,
they're missing the first. They're missing the first 2 pages. Then, what does it say in the first 2 pages? It says you don't need any more than these 7 terms. And also, I mean, this was back during the time when I was thinking calling the medium exploration and stuff like that. I mean, it continued to evolve. I threw out the term exploration. It doesn't mean anything or help us. We can just say the medium of play and be happy. We don't need a word. And stuff like that. But still, I mean, it says right there in the front of the glossary, 7 terms, and it says what they are. And if somebody's a devotee of the glossary, are you telling me they just didn't read the first 2 pages for some reason? Right?
Yeah, in a similar way, like at the beginning of some article about GNS, you mention this is what Ron thinks, this is not gospel, this is not.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so now, of course, I'm skipping or have not skipped because it's right about the same time of all of this is, the thing that everyone's scared of mentioning, or they come after me thinking that they can beat me with it, which is the brain damage discussion.
Right.
And so whatever one may think of it, I will not discuss this with anybody who hasn't read it, which instantly eliminates 99% of the people who want to talk about it or have opinions about it because they haven't read it. And so basically, I'll talk about that with anybody, but only if they go and read what actually was written.
What do you mean by read it? Do you mean those 2 posts? I mean, I have read 2 posts, the original one.
Yeah, there's 2 posts at the Forge.
And the explanation.
Yeah, back at the Addict Play inside the Forge. Yeah, that's it.
Right.
But and I've noted that when people do that, they say, "Oh, well, this isn't that bad." And I say, "That's right. It's not. It's just too tempting." Right outside the scope of what I wrote. It's too tempting. It's too good a weapon, right? It's too good a weapon not to grab.
Right.
So, the one injudicious thing was to provide a weapon that could be used. Was I insensitive toward real persons? I maintain I was not. So, anyway, So there's that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting in the context because right now we have a whole bunch of despicable blowhards through the vagaries of genetics who claim to represent the real TSR, even as we speak, right here on this screen.
Hmm.
Over in Lake Geneva, they claim to represent the real TSR. You may recognize that all the way back to the WotC purpose, the word TSR sort of became an orphan. It was now
Mm-hmm.
owned by Wizards of the Coast. Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast, and the TSR was kind of planted as a label on D&D products, but it wasn't even a trademark anymore. I mean, maybe it was like I don't know, an IP. They had IP to use the word, but I mean, it's not a company anymore. Well, for whatever reason, I don't know what the details are, but for some reason, the community of people, including one of the sons of Gary Gygax, is claiming that they are the TSR and they're going to publish stuff under the label TSR. And they've promised this and they've promised that. They haven't done a fucking thing, but they've made a big splash saying that the Gygax is back, right? It's TSR back where it belongs, this kind of thing.
Sure.
Well, there are a whole bunch of unregenerate assholes who have been hugely transphobic and basically are, making jerks of themselves left and right. In my opinion, people like this are insensitive toward others. They are harming others, right, with their rhetoric. They are, causing immense, and for lack of a better word, I mean, whatever the legacy of Gary Gygax personally and the controversial issue, but to basically stain the fact that yes, there is a massive history of role playing in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin that we should, recognize. To stain it with this is of no, I'm kind of disgusted. So what I'm trying to say is that
To stain it with this, like, what do you mean by this?
I'm talking about the behavior of people like Ernie Gygax right now,
Okay.
like as we speak. This is news. Everybody's all Twitter about it, literally.
Okay, so fair enough.
And
I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter, so
no, good for
thankfully,
you.
I guess.
Yeah,
Thankfully,
I get it mainly through Facebook, which is bad enough.
yeah.
But
Few people in Poland
right,
are on Twitter. Thankfully for us.
that's yes, thank God, I'm not either anymore. So but the point is that it's a big deal in the world of who said what about whom in role playing publishing, which is about as exciting as you can imagine. That's a big news. So I'm just pointing out that, yeah, we have people who are being particularly gross to other humans. We've got plenty of examples of that in role playing. And that it's real easy seeing a term like brain damage used to say, okay, who's he picking on? Who's he insulting? Who's he calling that? Right. And so it must be people he doesn't like. What a mean guy. So anyway, the point is that particular set of writings ended up being a separating device for me, which was unfortunate, which I'm not happy with. So do I regret writing it? It's a good question. I don't regret what I wrote. I think it's pretty good, actually. But I do think that it was very clearly, if you care about social tactics, which I don't because I'm bad at them.
Right.
I guess it's just a good example of how bad I am at social tactics. So I figured I might as well get that in there because it's relevant, right, to the history of the ideas.
Yeah, sure. Because like I've heard this, like people say like Ron Edwards only likes what he thinks about, and whoever disagrees with him, he calls brain damaged. Like I've heard that pitch. So
sure. Find an example of me actually
yeah.
calling another human brain damaged, and I'll be happy to talk with you about it because I'd be fascinated because I can't think of any such example. So anyway, the issue with that particular topic, though, is tied up with the issue of story creation. And it's tied up with the notion of whether the hobby in and of itself has been helpful toward the enjoyment of role playing as an activity? Do we have a hobby that actually is a supportive environment, for lack of a better word, for the production of role playing as an activity? And I don't necessarily mean spreading it to more and more and more people or anything like that. I just mean enjoying it. And more often, I am finding that the latest developments, camps of the perceived story games people and the perceived OSR people, even though most people I know are happy to play any game with it, regardless of label, but still, the culture of it all, the discourse of it all does seem to be extremely contentious about this, and I find it very uncritical. I think that the possibility of finding a community of people online who would like to role play with you and have a good time is shockingly small. Where do you find people to go and say, hey, what's role playing? How can we do it? Without suddenly getting barraged with, are you in or are you out? Who are you? What are you, with us or are you against us? Are you, this is the right way, right here. This is, oh, good, you came to us. Yeah, we'll show you the right way. Right? This is rife at the moment. It's very common at the moment, and I'm finding it. I'm looking at the nature of the hobby, the nature of publishing, the nature of design as it stands, and I'm saying this is pretty poor. This is a low standard of behavior, social behavior, of creative potential, of design power, of bang for buck, right? Commercially speaking, how much you pay and what you get for it. So I don't want to be too cranky about it, but it's a pretty grim portrait in my opinion. And we have tons of wonderful games to play. We have tons of wonderful games to play out there, old and new. I mean, there are games from 1976, 1975 I would love to play with you right now. There are games from last year, I'm certain, that, I don't keep up on all of them, but a lot of them get published, and I would be very surprised if a few of them weren't really good. So, yes, there are great games around and about, and there are people of goodwill. They want to play. They want to have a good time.
Interesting. I didn't notice, what you speak of are factions, tabletop role-playing game factions that seem to, believe that their way of playing is the correct way and want to recruit people. It's basically factions and faction wars. I haven't noticed that, I think. Not even, in Poland, not really, sure. In Poland, it's still
That's interesting. I know a few Polish people who tell me precisely the opposite.
Interesting. Okay, there are cultures of play, for sure, in Poland as well. And I think currently in Poland we have there is this article, I don't remember the name of the author. It's it defines 6 cultures of play that they believe have appeared over years, and we were reading it, and in Poland basically also has these 6 cultures of play. If we assume, of course, that this model is correct, but Poland seems to be, at the same level as the rest of the world in terms of role playing. There is no real cultural difference anymore, except for the types of games that are popular more in Poland.
Right, there may be historical artifacts of which games are better known and things like that.
Yeah, and there are some some cultures of play are more favorable than others, more liked than others, and some aspect of this. But communities trying to recruit people and tell that only their way of playing is the correct way. Okay, we have maybe a little bit of this. I think it's indie role-playing game fans. Mostly people, maybe something like what you have called story games players. Maybe these people have a little bit of this is the correct way to play and others are shit. But even so, I wouldn't make that argument in games of in
Well,
case of Poland.
I hope you're right. I mean, it's all I have to say. I really hope you're right, because that means that you've got a much healthier culture than the one that I encounter when I get into the more general look. Whenever I have a more general look at role playing or encounter that, I am really repelled by what I see. So therefore, and given, the conversations that I've had with you and Pavel and so on, I've been very pleased. I mean, it's been fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
And say that it's a lot like what I talked to you about with other communities that I've encountered since starting out to play. You're like, oh, these people are fun. Let's play together. Here, I'll get you and we'll play a game together. And they're like, wow, this is great.
We'll talk. We'll talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm thinking like because I don't want to give I don't want to give a too positive image of Poland. Because if you mention those faction wars, maybe okay, fair enough. To give the devil his due. Among the traditional ways of playing, like people who like have no idea about any games released after early 2000s, those people do seem to argue a lot, especially on social media. Like, but do they really? Like, I'm not.
Well, I'm not. You don't really need to force yourself into judging, other communities right now. I've done
especially
enough
especially if I judge by the English speaking Twitter standards, there's no arguments in Poland. Like everything is dandy.
Oh, nothing like that, right? Oh, that's
no,
good.
This is like another level. Maybe like recently we have some discussions. Some of them are imported from the West. Funnily enough, like we import political views and stances and actually issues from the West. Like one of those topics is all the safety tools. Like if someone mentions safety tools and God forbid the X card, it's hell immediately. Like people immediately go into worldviews and politics and nothing productive is being done. Mostly we kind of have had a kind of fruitful discussions like 2 days ago on our Discord server, so there's hope. But other than that, there is some of this, sure. But
well, I'm glad that it's in the zone. I mean, in Sweden, for example, a number of years ago, there were across the Nordic countries, there were ferocious factionalizing about different aspects of role playing, and there's this huge LARP community here, which has been going on for a really long time. It kind of has sort of we're the nobility of the hobby sort of attitude, or had anyway. Now, the long-standing Rollspiel forum it's a great place. It's a great place. All kinds of different games, all kinds of different discussions, different activities. And so for whatever reason, across the Nordic countries, there's a lot more. I mean, people have strong opinions sometimes, but they don't have these. And I've run into one or two people who've kind of, oh, you're the cultist, that sort of thing, but not much. And so therefore it's been, I mean, I went to GothCon, which is the big Swedish convention, loved it. Fun people, fun activities, great organization, good attitudes. It was comfortable and comforting and fun and intellectually challenging to be there. So, it may well be, that's what we really should focus on. Let's just pay attention to the people who are really enjoying themselves with it. Let's just do that. That's more or less what I've been doing. I mean, I haven't jumped in with both feet into all kinds of debate or, controversy or anything like that, because we're not really talking about much of a community, talking about sort of a fabricated, short-term, small packet of information, highly reactive set of interactions. That really isn't anything I would think of as a community, so who cares?
Yeah, and in our experience, because there were forums back in the day, but after social media got popular, especially Facebook, like Facebook has pretty bad tools for communities. You have fans of this channel or of these kinds of role-playing games. So actually, I think the dialogue, and especially the community, has deteriorated over the years. And got fragmented, and you suddenly...
a lot of people like G+, and I despised it. I hated G+.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I was aware that a lot of discussion in English-speaking world was happening on G+. Didn't catch
It
up in
did,
Poland?
but
Did it
like
catch
all
on?
social media, it disappears. It
Right.
disappears, right? And so even if you had like a really good exchange of conversation with somebody, it was gone.
Right.
And so that's why with Adept Play, especially when I saw people starting to complain about this, it was sort of funny because at first everybody was agreed to those bad old forums. We have to get rid of the bad old forums. And then after a few years of G Plus and Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that, a lot of people are bemoaning, well, where's the institutional memory? Where's the sense of, building, communities people
Right.
can join,
Right.
people can leave, and it's still there, it's not just a wavefront. And I was kind of like, you mean like forums? Right.
Okay.
And
So,
yeah, go ahead.
what is Adept Play?
Right. Adept Play, first and foremost, is my business here in Sweden. And it provides several things. The easy ones are that I will consult for role-playing games and design. Another one, which is that I will teach classes and that I hold through my Patreon seminars and labs and stuff like that, ongoing discussions or interviews like this one, for example. So, so that's sort of the me side of Adept Play.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of sorry, both a workshop in terms of consulting and working on games that you might want to work on, but also more like an academy, like with small a, right?
Right.
Small a academy. We're going to be rigorous here. We're going to talk about things that interest us in a pretty organized way. We've
Mm-hmm.
agreed, that we're going to do this in an organized way. Tweet somewhere else. So there's that. And all that's free, right? There's no paywall. I mean, you can go pay me at the Patreon. I like that, but it's not required. There's no secret stuff at Adept Play. It's a website, which means that it's old school. There's actually a URL. It's not hooked into all the different social media platforms. So it pops up in your feed, whatever came up in Adept Play today, although I suppose I should have it do that, but when the day comes that somebody does that on the back end of the website, it will. Um, so, but what else is it? It is also a place where we are primarily just celebrating actually playing the games. And that means that if you play role playing or have done it in the past or whatever, it's a section called Adept Play where you basically pump in what it amounts to a blog post, but it's really its own forum, right? It's really its own forum. It's got its
Okay.
little forum structure inside it. And so you talk about the game that you played, or you can provide a video or something, or an audio if you record your play. You don't have to. It can be old stuff, new stuff, and it's not high pressure. If you just want to say, hey, we had a great time, and here's the part I really liked, and that's all you post, that's fine. If you're one of these deep intellectual types who's been like doing all the seminars and stuff like that, and you say, well, in the latest game, there's this thing that was said last year, and I was really thinking about that right here, if you wanted to do that. So for sort of more of an engaged, everybody's paying attention to each other kind of discussion. But the hope is that we, at the very least, we can all see, or anybody who goes there can see, there are lots of people playing lots of games, and they have good times, they have not so good times. They have surprisingly good times, or they have the kind of good time that they knew they were coming for. Or this time it didn't work out so well. I wonder why that is, right? It's not about showing off how great you are as the game master, or how great you are your group.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the best group, right? We're really good role players. It's much more about, this is real people, all shapes and sizes, all languages, locations all around the world, different histories with the particular histories with which games, and a willingness to say, all right, well, I put it up here, and if anybody wants to ask questions or anything, I guess I'll, talk about it a little bit. But there's no mandated, criterion that's going to be applied to post, right? Bring your game here, and we're going to do this to it, right? That's nothing like that of the kind. because it's really striking back, frankly, at well, the striking back is too strong a word. It is providing, I think, a street level contrast to the sort of slick presentations, the entertainment based presentations that you find that they call actual play today, which are professional entertainment pieces that are provided as professional entertainment. And it's actors who are playing role players who themselves are playing a role playing game. And while they may be playing that role playing game, I kind of question whether they are. They're more interested in playing the role players who are playing that game, the personae that they are standing in for, as in their performance.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they're having a good time because a lot of it involves improv, which they are professionally good at. They're funny. They are not, however, what actually is done at that table as a role-playing game really isn't really what's going on. Whereas what I would like people to see when they come to Adept Play is they say, oh, look, here are people who are not professional actors, and look at the way they interact and talk with each other. Look at what happened in that session. You can actually see like what they do to make that happen. I'm not quite the pro that would have like 4 cameras so that I've got the die, the camera on my dice table so you can actually see the dice rolled while we play. Ideally, that might be kind of nice one day, but I'm wary of overproducing. You'll notice my videos, I think, are pretty clean. I edit them carefully to get rid of background noise, and I edit them carefully. Well, some things are unavoidable. I do have kids.
Right.
But in general, and I edit out all the breaks, but I don't edit out all the ums. I don't edit out all the genuine human interaction that goes on at a role-playing table.
Right.
It looks rougher.
We went.
I like the net. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we went through similar issues when considering because we kind of a lot of channels in Poland go through this issue. Like, where is the limit? Because at some point, you no longer
it'll take over. Yeah, it will.
There's like 2 aspects of this because it differs what happens at the table, and it differs like what do you show to the people, because some people might argue that okay, so you edited it and you added music and you added whatnot, so you're no longer showing us a role-playing game, you're showing us a product.
Yes, I know, but there is a line there, and it's funny because I'm sitting in Scandinavia where this all went down like Viking battles 25 years ago about cinema. Right. How authentic is cinema? And you can go back to the debates from 25 years ago and the different movies that came out of it. And it's all the same thing. You're right that every person is going to have the line where they say, okay, past that, I'm starting to question the authenticity. And I know where my line is for my own work. I know where I would say, when I step over that, I look at what I produce and I say, that's not really what we did. This is not really conveying what we did. And so right now I'm staying pretty far away from that line. But I can't say my line's the same as anyone else's for that.
And for some people, for example, for us, I guess like the line is, we have accepted creating products for our channel. Like, we are adamant about playing the role-playing game while we play and record it.
Right.
Because we're not doing second takes or anything
right,
of that
sort. Exactly.
Because you could start basically producing a cheap radio show.
That's pretty much exactly what's going on with Critical Role and whatnot, which is as entertainment, and they're not lying.
I'd say that's arguable. Like, I mean, arguable. Like, no, that's
debatable.
Yes. But however, that seems to be a different topic, and we are nearing the end of our time. So I would like to ask you, like, I guess the last kind of big question, if I may, which is like 2021. Someone who has no idea about RPG theory, about any models, haven't heard of GNS, the big model, or any other models, if there are any, and he comes to you. What would you say is the, like, for you, to your understanding, the best way to think about the best model you can give that person?
One of the very first posts that I put up at Adept Play is a set of short videos And I think that they are actually not the first videos that should be in a series, but they're the first ones I made. Ideally, there should be a set of short presentations about play. And I actually have done some rough drafts of that, which patrons have seen. They're on the Patreon. Then there would be one called Phenomena, which is what the kind of stuff you and I have been talking about, right? Things that are happening, they are real, but it's not the kind of thing you think about when you do it. And then after that, there could be, stuff on design, stuff on, other aspects of it all that are more embedded in that side of things. But the phenomenology, which is a terrible word, I chose it as a joke. I would say phenomena now, which is marginally better. They're 5 little short videos, and they're not bad. They're rough as hell. They're among the first videos I ever made. But they are pretty well phrased. Redoing those is an ongoing process. In fact, that's actually the second version of them that's up there.
I see. Okay.
And so it is, if you just want to know what is this thing? How does it work? I mean, universally speaking, this is it. This is what I have to say about it. It's pretty easy. It's in plain language. There's nothing, strange about it. And there are a variety of other short bits and pieces that are not all that well collated at its play. I would like them to be, so you actually have a bit of a texty series, right, to kind of look at, say a little library, right, which would be nice. The material's there. There have been some great interviews. There have been some presentations and debates that don't have me in them. There have been a few other things, but people have stayed very close to, hey, we're human beings at the table, right? We're not here to opine from above. We're not pundits. We're not opinion makers. We're a bunch of people playing our role-playing games at the table, and we like to think about what we've done once in a while. And that's what At Its Play is about. Let's celebrate the fact that we do play first. And you can learn about what play is if you want to take that one more step, into the discussions and into the seminar section. But that's what it has to offer. Because I would like people who are curious about role-playing or bump into it and say, well, that sounds creative. What is that? To be able to do it. I'd like them to. And the range of whom you could play with is vast these days. It's vast. If it weren't the pandemic, then I would have developed a much more face-to-face network out of the Spielenshus here in Norrköping, which is this great role-playing and gaming kind of community place. But because of the pandemic, I've had to cut back to mainly screen stuff. And as far as the screen stuff is concerned, yes, if you come, poke at the Discord a little bit, which is linked at Its Play, which I concede is necessary in this day and age. You do have to have a function of that kind. And Discord with a very simple server is as far as I can stand it. But do that, or poke around At Its Play, ask some people for some directions. What should I look at, or whatever. Hopefully the site will eventually be retooled one day into a more obvious archival, I don't know what the right word is for it, but a venue in which you can actually look at cool things that you would like to see. With any luck, that will and can occur. But until then, it's not that hard to get me or someone friendly to say, oh, well, I think you'd like this. Someone says, I'm really interested in this topic. And you say, check that out. One of the people at the 4th edition D&D convention that I'm playing in next month, I'm running a session there, noted something I had said about how I plan to do mapping. And then we talked to each other privately. And they want to talk all about what I call, and this is a piece of terminology I have never been able to shake. I have got to find a better way to say it. IIEE. I mean, I've got to come up with another word, right? But
Right.
whatever it is, the point is that person is interested. So now I can say, well, okay, we have 2 Monday Lab seminars at Its Play about that exact thing. If you don't mind, checking out the videos, then, the hour or 2 a piece, we'll see some people talking about all kinds of things about this and their experiences in play.
Mm-hmm.
And we're, and it's reasonably, I think, intellectually solid, but socially ordinary, rather than being like a panel of experts.
Right.
That I think it's engaging. I want to have the humanity of role playing on display.
Right. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but funnily enough, I think what you've been known for, or you are known for in Poland, are the models you have created, like the GNS and the big model. But it seems to me like it's always, like it hasn't been about the models, like at any point, really. It was more about the community.
Really? Yeah.
And the process of intellectual exchange and conversations. And the
And
models...
the enjoyment of play itself. If people are having, because one of the biggest problems that I have encountered throughout the history of role playing are the people who have said, well, I just stopped role playing because I hate it. It doesn't work. And I hate all the people. And I hate myself now. And then other people who perhaps less negatively say, well, I tried it and I bounced off. I tried a couple of sessions and I bounced off and I didn't quite get it. And I'm still kind of puzzled as to why that happened, but I've never role played since. Or people who say, yeah, we're playing. It's okay. It's okay, I guess. And you find a lot of people in that situation. And one thing I can say about At Its Play is that a lot of people who show up in that situation, a couple of months later, they are playing and having a really good time. So I'm agreeing with you. Yes, it is about, see, community as a word has been completely toxified. It's been turned into like target market practically, right? I mean, it's been turned almost into, like a faction or something like that, or people who are captive, you gather your community and you grow your community, right? And you keep your community and so on.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm far more interested in community in the very casual sense of the word, which has nothing to do with belonging and nothing to do with staying. And it has a lot to do with the activity that's going on that's being valued that you're going to enjoy when you're there, or partly due to being there. So in that sense, yes, I am about community, if that's what we are very careful to specify.
Yes.
The term became a marketing term about 15, 16 years ago, and
yes,
has not.
Yeah, when I said community, I meant a group of people that is doing something together.
Sure, I get
Basically.
that.
Right.
Even saying a group is kind of interesting because we need to think of the group much like a dynamic thing. People are leaving when they want and they're arriving when they want.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So with that specified, then absolutely, yes, that's what I'm always about. And the enjoyment of the medium for the properties that it offers that no other medium I know does. It really is, I think, a valuable human thing to do. And I mean, intimacy, enjoyment, creativity,
Right.
unpredictability, varying levels of success as you go along, which is okay, right? And the surprising freedom, or at least semi-freedom, the intractability against commerce. It's really hard for commerce to take over if you're focusing on just enjoying play. So that's kind of a nice thing. So those are all the things that I'm trying to present and reinforce.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much as well. I guess we'll be in touch because this, our dear viewers and listeners, this concludes our trilogy of podcasts. There won't be any more, at least anytime soon.
Hallelujah. On the other hand, you and I interacting, or you and anyone in the community, no, there I go again, community, anybody that you freaking know,
Right.
who's, the interactions among us are, I hope, nicely seeded and full of potential for all sorts of, interaction after that.
Sure. We're just already we are old people already, so we have to plan and we have to schedule and we have to agree on something before we jump into it and commit time and resources. So we'll see where it goes. But for now, I guess, thank you again. And viewers, if you have any questions, probably wherever you listen to it or watch it, there's probably a comment section below. So feel free, I guess it will probably be at least on YouTube, as well as it will be linked on Adept Play.
Really?
So as the first episode was. So thank you, and goodbye.
Take care.